Hi, everyone. Oh, we have to hit, got it. Okay. Okay. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I don't have my teleprompter, so I'm going to be reminding myself about stuff on notes here. In fact, I'm even going to read most of my introduction. But I hope you'll listen, and as you are taking all of this in, come up with the questions, and maybe we can have I do think that the interaction between the audience with questions and things like that will be a little more lively. So I look forward to that part. And I certainly hope that we're going to have enough time. So the topic is about creating a grief culture in your family after losing a loved one to suicide. Your grief culture includes the conversations, symbols, and way of life that your family uses to take in the reality of the loss, to understand the suicide, and to remember the person who died. The focus will be attending to your children, helping them gradually feel comfortable, sharing some of their thoughts and feelings, memories, and questions about the loved one. Also, ensuring that they can cope with their loss experience. This includes shielding them from your own interior battles that are appropriate for you to share with supportive adults. The idea of culture may seem unrelated to grief, but if you've had a life-changing loss, we see that a family establishes ways of operating around the loss that offers some kind of stability, but also remembers the person who died. It becomes a way of life that we live privately, but healthy sharing is something that is learned. A family's grief culture starts with the life-changing loss. All family members, from infancy to the aged, are affected. What are our patterns of interaction regarding the loss? How do we tailor those interactions appropriately for each person? We may respond to the death anniversary, birthdays, milestones with rituals and emotion that is shared. But unexpected grief can pop up as we are stimulated by the world around us. There's value in sharing some of the unexpected grief moments as we discover them. I hope the presentation will offer insight about how this can be encouraged. Finding the best way to interact around grief moments with kids is not a perfect process. Sometimes it doesn't work. But we can be confident that feeling into a grief moment gently, with curiosity and respect, will do no harm. It may even open up to a precious shared moment. Your grief culture will be unique to your family. It'll have your own style. It'll reflect the values and the personalities that you find there. It can also include uncomfortable disclosures because relationships can be problematic. These disclosures can be so important to grief resolution, sometimes requiring courage. The goal is to model and develop the expression of healthy grief responses and accepting what you hear. Part of grief is private and part is shared, to be discovered in a safe place with someone else. From you, the parent, it requires attention, but not control. Finding ways to talk about grief has to take root, and everyone will need practice. Getting comfortable with grief can take time. For a newly bereaved parent, this may seem impossible. You have no energy, you're weeping all the time, you're in shock. But even here, you can model honesty. I'm struggling, but somehow I'm going to be okay. I'm so glad I have you guys. And you might add, am I making you feel scared when I cry? And then you can offer a hug. Here, a culture of sharing, of emotional honesty and assurance, even during the greatest time of vulnerability, begins. It conveys respect for the children that care about you. And it may even mirror their feelings, but primarily it says, that you can be emotionally available, at least periodically, during a terrible time. As we know, all suicide losses are different. Our relationships with the one who died may have been very complicated as a result of separation or divorce, drug or alcohol use, teen rebellion, conflict. But even complexity can be woven into grief culture that learns to validate feelings of confusion or regret or anger. In safety, all feelings are welcome and invited to process. Shared grief can be fulfilling and life affirming, but private grief is powerful. It's a large part of the grieving person's identity and self-definition. The way your family regards the value of private grief is part of your family's culture. How do we monitor and protect the private grief of kids and teens? How much privacy is too much? It is a delicate process. Over time, the family's grief culture will pass through more intense and less active times. Needs change, and acceptance of loss usually comes. The rewards of a healthy family grief process are emotional closeness, safety in feeling seen and heard, and a narrative about the person who died that is not only idealized, but truly known. And then we'll start our PowerPoint. Okay. So my question is, the configuration of all of our people is along the side. I wonder if it's, can you see the little bubble with the words? You can? Okay. Okay, we can, okay, Debbie, Emily. Okay, so I can't see all of the words because of people. Can you make them at the top?
So Cindy, that is something you'll have to do on your end.
Okay, I see now. I think I can do it. Thanks, Emily.
Yeah.
Okay, so my theme in trying to talk about how we work with children that are experiencing suddenly a profound experience. It is an experience that is felt in their bodies, experienced in their minds, and it always will really test the capacity of their developmental stage. So be able to enter that with your children, we like to talk about making space in the adult's mind for the child. And it's based on kind of a radical acceptance for the child's truth and exploration of the loss. So we have to use wisdom when we're looking at the child's complex relationship with the person who died, and we're going to get more into that. We're going to respect the child's particular attachment for the person who died, even if it differs from your own. And we're going to use empathy, seeing and hearing when we're talking with children about the loss, and to be prepared for some pushback, because we often get some kind of resistance from kids when they feel like you're trying to interpret what they're saying, and sometimes it's not right on target. We do this with something, not quite yet. Okay, we do this with something that's called, I like to call wonderings rather than questioning a child, because it's less intrusive. It's not coming to a conclusion. But the wondering is kind of, it's informed by awareness of the child's developmental needs. So it would be something like, I wonder how you felt going out with Jeremy and his dad when you are still missing your dad so much. So that really kind of opens it up. The child might kind of latch onto that no matter what the age. They may not. You may be attaching importance to it, the child may not. during a tantrum. I wonder if turning off the TV makes you miss mommy more and more. Let's rock together. So these are the kind of tangential things that can be attached to a child's loss experience. They don't know that turning off the TV necessarily has anything to do with losing mommy, but it is tangential. So everyone becomes so much more sensitive to stressors when they're enduring the grief experience, especially when it's fresh. We want to be sensitive about spontaneous grief triggers. This kind of, it's like you're in the car with a 4-year-old and she recognizes the cemetery. And she suddenly wants to talk about daddy being in the ground because this is the way it's been explained to her. But you are tested right now. You're trying to drive a car and it requires something of you to kind of open up and be able to hold this with the child, recognizing the cemetery, being aware of what it means to the child, and helping her to kind of enlarge that statement that she made, find out where it's coming from. Children are often seeing the word suicide on television because of the mental health crises that we've associated with COVID. And I am sure that there are many questions about, will I die from suicide? Will you die from suicide? Because of all of these things that we're seeing on TV. But then there are some very, positive, spontaneous things that you can see, like seeing a motorcycle on the road next to you, saying, oh, that's just like John, right? John being the person who died. Okay, next frame. Okay, so after a period of time, everyone is going to be working on adaptations to the loss, and we want them to be positive, of course, but it can still be kind of rocky. So as we start to adjust, your child is going to be, especially children who are school age and teens, your child's going to show effort and sometimes resilience. But this doesn't mean that you should assume meaning around that effort and resilience. So you're going to ask with curiosity and always remember that grief is sovereign and sacred. Sometimes a child's effort and resilience does have something to do with the person who died. We're going to talk about that later. And sometimes it's a little insulting for them to think that you're doing something because of the loved one who died. So you have to stay very open around that stuff. Empathy on your part yields empowerment in yourself and your kid, and it is a practice. All feelings deserve to be respected when you're trying to talk with your child about something, even if they say, I don't know. And be prepared to find that you've read their feeling in error. Okay, next frame. Practice validating your child's difficult feelings with empathy and those tangential issues, which are kind of like oddly related to the loss. You want to value healthy developmental activities. I think this is one of the most important things that we can stress for grief recovery and the grief culture in families. I think that it's one of the things that we try to read and monitor is how children are able to keep up with their developmental activities after a profound loss. So it's important. And when you see somebody withdrawing from their activities, when it seems quite clear to you that one of these young people are depressed, they have sleep disruption, or they're sleeping all the time, or if you know that there has been trauma associated with their loss, I really want to encourage you to find counseling. Next frame. Okay. So the developmental phases or emphases are, we've got babies, the infants, the toddlers, the preschoolers, and the adolescents, and they all have tasks that they're working on. And the frame that you're looking at right now is very, very pared down and simplified. But I think that it's good for what we're just talking about tonight. So the things that we want to pay attention to after bereavement with babies is their need for attachment, constancy, and reliability. And this has to do with the capacity of the parent, the surviving parent or caregiver, to be able to provide the warmth, the closeness, and the dependability that the baby needs. And this can be a challenge sometimes for deeply grieving parents. Toddlers, toddlers are testing for the ability to be assertive and independent, and they have a little bit of language, and they're going to be able to talk about the loss a very little bit. They see it in terms of just absence. They don't get that the person is unable to come back, even though we can talk with them about that. Preschool and school-age children are working on skills and socialization. We want them to be with friends. They want to learn how to do things, whether it's Legos or art or swimming. They want to learn how to do things. And it's delightful for them, and we're hoping that they'll still have the capacity for this after their loss. Teens are testing themselves for mastery. They want to become very good at something. So it's going to be sports, it's going to be art, it's going to be being an iconoclast. It's for socialization and intimacy. And I think that teens and school-age kids are where the meaning making starts. They're going to start making sense of what a suicide means and what it means about their relationship with the person who died. Next frame. Okay. So this is exactly related to the bereavement experience. Again, infancy, no understanding. They're only learning about trust and what they can count on. So there's been this absence. This baby experiences relationships in terms of mutually regulating interactions. It may have been that child's mom, the primary caregiver, and there is going to be disruption in the caregiving experience. Even if it might be something that you're not noticing, because the child's being fed, it's being put to sleep appropriately. I'm just convinced that there will be some kind of impact of the loss on even an infant. Okay, Emily. Okay, what I wanted to say about talking with kids who are not that verbal, a stuffed animal or a quilt made from the loved one's clothes can be a starting point. A framed picture that you can point to and talk about on the bed, on the wall, or somewhere sitting in the bedroom of the child. Don't forget to say the loved one's name. This is a culture that you're creating with the child, and the name has to be a regular part of their life. And then, of course, providing warm, consistent care. Go ahead. So at the beginning, use of language with someone like a toddler, you can begin to talk with them about death. You don't expect them to take in very much. You can begin talking about the permanency of the absence. You can expect some of this assertion to be maybe intensified on the part of the toddler where the behavior is getting a little bit more challenging for you. And then there's some concern that with a child of this age, when their assertion or their behavior becomes challenging, that they might associate the absence of the parent who has died with self-blame or shame, to associate it with their own behavior. And we can mitigate some of that by just showing appreciation and delight for the baby, for the child, where it's not performance related, like just saying, I love your cheeks. Okay, go ahead, Emily. Okay. I think that this is the preschool child. They have a beginning sense of finality about death. They know about it from watching cartoons and seeing TV, but they don't associate it with their own family. They're also used to seeing dead bugs or a dead bird or something like that, and maybe they've stopped to look at it. And we explain to them that that bird is dead; it can't fly anymore. But they don't associate it with their own people. They still see the death of the family member as absent, and with the possibility of return. They use some magical thinking. I do remember very clearly a 4-year-old who was trying to show her mom that although she understood that her dad was in heaven, she drew pictures of ladders going up to the sky, and felt that it would be possible to get one of these ladders and that they would be able to visit. Those are difficult conversations because children can have so much hope. And I think that it's important to just meet the child where she is and appreciate that ladder that they've made instead of trying to change it. So we're always going to try to use, be aware of the fact of your understanding, what the child understands, and also be aware of maybe a third understanding that you haven't been able to acknowledge yet. So children of this age, you're going to notice intermittent grief responses. That means sometimes they're showing evidence of the grief and sometimes they are not at all. And the reason for this is because the developmental demands in childhood and especially in teenage years are so intense that they have to be able to reserve some energy and mental space to be able to work on those developmental tasks. Okay, Emily. All right, school age children. They do understand the finality of death, but where they're going to get confused sometimes is the causality. And sometimes they're going to come up with their own explanations for why somebody died. School age children, we very clearly are able to tell them about suicide. We can use the word, but there are many parents or surviving parents that don't want to do that. I've heard that many, many times. I don't see why you have to use that word, but I think it's important to build upon the truth that the person who died ended their own life. And with younger ones, we say they made their own body stop working. Some kids are going to press that and say, how, why? And you can do that without using any graphic imagery. You can say, he used a gun. Something like that. If you ever have any questions, I hope that you'll call Loss and we can help you to, we can do a little consultation and we can help you navigate through tough moments. Again, you're going to see the intermittent grief responses. School age kids, I would say 7 through 12. They still might hold the deliberate illusion that the loved one is present. And I have met with children that are just convinced that that they saw the person who died, that it was in their house or in their yard. And I think it's important to not say, you're wrong, it's impossible. I think it's important to listen and just to get their story about what happened. This is their reality. It helps a child with that limited capacity to cope. And it keeps conversation going. And even if they're saying something that doesn't make very much sense to you, that listening, feeling seen and heard is so healing. A school-age child, I see one of these common problems is that they may feel shame at the fact that their family is not intact. So it can be so hard for them when they go to a friend's house and see the mom and the dad or all of the siblings are present in that family, and they come home and they know that their own family is different, and they're growing to it takes a long time to feel that your family is not broken. Okay, next frame. Okay, adolescence. I wouldn't say that adolescent grief is more challenging, but it is so much more verbal. There's so much more cognitive, the thought formation around it. There's a lot of moral discernments and judgments that come from teens, especially around this subject, which is so existential. They still might fantasize about the return of the loved one or be doing, there's a good possibility that they're making some choices like, well, I'm going to play basketball because my dad loved basketball, even if they're not a big basketball fan. That's some of the stuff that you're going to be talking about in your grief culture, because it's now a subject. The loss informs us as we move along in life. And it's very much so with teens because they're making choices all the time. There's a lot more space for them to do that. We're still going to see the intermittent grief response because the developmental tasks at this point are compelling, and they need all of that mental space and energy to be able to deal with them. Next frame. Okay, I don't want to neglect the effects of personality on the way children deal with their losses. We know from pretty much the time that a child is born that they have very distinct personalities. Some of them are, the introversion, the extroversion. This is all pretty obvious early on. And we also know that some kids are more emotionally regulated than other kids. Very commonly, after a family is bereaved by suicide, people start sleeping together. And sometimes it goes on for a very long time. You're going to have to make judgments based on your child's personality and coping ability. You're going to have to make some decisions about how you approach their emotional regulation around the loss. And it's going to give you some hints really about how they're coping. Some children are just quieter and more introverted and subdued. And with those children, we don't want to assume that they're not having an intense grief experience. Some children just don't say what they're thinking. They don't like to display a lot of emotion. I like to use creativity as a kind of personality because I do see this in particular kids that kind of approach everything new in their life with a kind of creative approach to it. And I'm not saying just art. I'm saying this has to do sometimes with just, kind of being project oriented. Of course, the art is wonderful, and it's a fantastic outlet for some of the concerns of a grieving young person. Some personalities that we see in kids are to be caregivers, and they're going to want to be invested in your experience. It's always a little bit of a red flag for me, because it does help the child to cope in a way and to feel empowered when they're trying to take care of you, the grieving parent. But I feel like that's something that we always have to be sensitive about and try to encourage that child to feel confident or hopeful in the parent so that they don't have to be watching you all the time. Some kids are pleasers and achievers. These could also be the same caregivers that we just talked about. Pleasers and achievers can be there because the sister or the brother that they lost was a star of some kind, and they are wanting to fill that sibling's shoes, or they feel that the parent that they lost would want them to be doing well in a certain subject or at a certain sport. These are the things that we notice, that we can approach with very sensitive, wondering statements, and try to have a conversation that is productive, but sensitive. So I guess I'm hesitating here because I want to say, I think we should always kind of let the child be in charge of those conversations, that the parent is attentive, but not in control. It's very much about respecting the child's experience of loss. What they verbalize and share is really something to be regarded as a gift. And I know as a therapist, that's how I see it. It makes wonderful sessions when something is shared. Sometimes it's done very tentatively, but it is a gift when it happens. We have to respect their privacy. Okay, next frame. Okay. So privacy in grief is something that we want to keep our eye on at the same time that we're respecting this part of our child's grief experience. So kids and teens will sometimes try to minimize their own grief in the presence of their bereaved parents. And this allows them to be the caregivers, or allows them to keep an eye on you, because this is somehow giving them some indication about whether everything is going to be okay, whether we're going to be able to survive this. So we're going to be aware somehow that kids have intermittent grief, that they're showing it at times, picking it up and putting it down at other times. And minimizing grief is a little bit different because it's always going to be kind of tamped down when they're home, when they're around their parents, to not show what their true experience is. Another thing that usually happens in privacy is that a child is going to form their own narrative and explanation about the suicide, which could be very different from yours. This is another area where I think great delicacy is required and has to be allowed, blessed, I think, when a child has a different story about the suicide than you do. So some of these, let's see, I had. Yeah, they're going to take cues from you, but they're going to have all of this internal stuff going on. So when they form their own narrative, one teen that I know decided that his family had a pressure to excel. He decided that this was not a good thing. He decided this because after his sibling died, he was going to try to fill her shoes, and work at things with the same uh, uh, aggression and determination that she had. She was kind of remarkable in her achievements. But he decided that everyone in the family was responding to an expectation that everyone excel. So he saw this. The parents did not provide a narrative in any way to the family. They were a family of high pressure, and that the daughter's suicide was in some way connected with pressure. And it was this one particular child who formed this perspective. And he was very gradually, after a lot of counseling, found it very easy to talk with his family about how he understood the family's dynamics. And it turned out to be quite productive and quite courageous, I think, on his part. And I am supposing that the family was able to kind of work with this, but it was empowering for him to, it was very empowering for him to develop his own voice around the loss, and to be able to, at some point, share that with his parents. It's in that private space that risk or resilience in coping with the loss is sometimes indicated. It's a very delicate process. I think it's really nice when you can have a counselor involved where these things can be discussed. And then you've kind of got two eyes looking at a particular child about what their process is like. Teens can be intensely private and boundaried as they reflect on their questions about what happened. We haven't talked very much here about kids losing siblings, and I think that this is a unique loss experience. There are so many things that affect, there's just so many things that affect this kind of grief response, and it has a lot to do with that any particular child's observations about the parent's relationship with that child. Also, their own relationship with the sibling who died. Sometimes it involved a lot of conflict, rivalry, competition, and all of this. It doesn't mean that they're not grieving. It just means that they have their own unique grief experience, which may feel very different from yours. Let's see if there's anything here I can add. Okay. There was a 13-year-old who had been bullied by an older brother. There was a child who viewed the sibling who died as the favored one. A wonderful, talented child who understood the brother who took his life as somebody who's just fantastic. And I'm very concerned that she will appreciate her brother's abilities more than her own. So that's what we want to protect for that young one. Okay, next frame. So when I say witnessing, I'm talking about witnessing our own grief experience, which is dynamic and alive. It comes up and it recedes. We witness our own experience, and then we also witness the experience of our children. There's no harm in witnessing the deep sadness and tears that they see in you, as long as their needs for stability are met. So Stability is going to change after a profound loss. I see families courageously trying to kind of get things together so that they can function again. And this is appropriate. It's one of the first jobs that you do. In fact, I don't think that real grief can begin until there is some kind of stable environment for you to do that work. I always want to let parents know that we want to avoid unchecked hysteria. It's not okay. It creates fear and barriers to sharing. It's great if you're having experiences like this in your loss to have a trusted adult that you can talk with, or to get a counselor yourself. You want to avoid imposing your own interior battles. So if you're the person who had the divorce, or you're the one who suffered at the hands of somebody who was abusive or substance abusing, and then they died, you're still having grief. Your grief is very complicated, but you don't want to impose those interior battles on the children. You want to model healthy expression of all kinds of feelings and offer assurance. I love you, and we're going to get through this. That means you're acknowledging this is a very hard time, but that there's hope. Okay. Next frame. Here we are back to this making space in your mind for your child. I think it's really kind of a spiritual practice. I don't think it necessarily comes naturally. I think that it's something that's intentional. So I think that says, consider opening your mind to your child's unique experience, and make that a value. You want to learn about authoritative parenting versus authoritarian parenting. So I do see families have some trouble with communication about grief and kind of the free expression of feelings that are both acted out and verbalized, when the parenting style is a little bit more about behavior modification, like using quite a bit of in the way of behavior charts, that kind of thing. It's very, very hard to monitor behavior like that and to be consistent about those messages with a profound grief experience that's going on, especially in the acute phase. So yes, we want children to understand that we have boundaries around certain behaviors, but it seems like everything kind of loosens up to be able to accommodate for love and support after a profound loss. So authoritative parenting it just means that you're the person who can be counted on, where that children will come to you for guidance and direction. But authoritarian is really more about you being the knower. And if you are the knower, that just leaves leaves less space for everybody to explore grief. Acknowledge that there are private thoughts and feelings and validate them. Celebrate the nuances of your child. Some are just absolute characters and unique, and that is going to be part of the way they're going to express their grief. And I really hope that can be celebrated. By that I mean valued. The differences are valued. I think a really nice part of grief culture is to read stories about loss. There are so many young adult books that are about coming of age through loss. Grief really is a vehicle for children coming into their own, for differentiating themselves from their parents or their authority figures. And then there are so many stories for toddlers that are about death that can generate more conversation. So that can be a regular part of your lifestyle, where your loss becomes part of death education, which is something that we all benefit from. So is there another frame there, Emily? Or is that the end? Okay. Yeah, this is the supporting research that I always like to share with people. These are all wonderful books. Grief is a Family Process is a little bit more of a clinical book for therapists, but she has a huge and gifted perspective on how all-encompassing family bereavement is, and its potential for growth in its individual family members. Ellen Wolfelt is kind of an anchor in the bereavement business. Helping children cope with grief is something anybody can read and benefit from. The Child Mind Institute is something you can find online. I think it's called childmindinstitute.com. It's wonderful. You just go online and you can kind of type in your question, like tantrums or emotional eating in children. It's something like this. And you're going to have all these articles that you can read that are based on studies. Educate yourself so that you have insight as to what's going on with your kids. And then finally, Our Families in Loss have taught me everything that I know. And I have so much respect for their efforts and their resilience and their openness. And they are the ones who really have taught me about what it means to make space in an adult's mind for a child or an adolescent. And that's it. And we can now talk about any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Cindy. Yes, absolutely. So if anyone has questions or maybe a scenario that has been kind of working itself out in your family, please feel free either to put it in the chat, or if you're comfortable, you can unmute yourself and just ask out loud. That is also very welcome. Got any takers?
Like I said, we do welcome emails and phone calls if you have any questions. I always advocate for reading, going to the Child Mind Institute and asking questions and finding things that support you in your great efforts to work with your bereaved kids.
I have a question, Cindy, that's come up just a couple times in our work too. Is there anything that changes if we're talking about an adolescent who's lost a friend and not a family member? Like, is there something that if parents maybe aren't actively grieving in the same way that they can do to support their teen that might be grieving the loss of a friend?
Yeah, so there are these these different subjects. There's the loss of a friend is usually done with many other friends, and it usually takes on a real large format, like memorial services at school. Or I'm not saying that there's not a private aspect to friend grief, but it's usually done at kind of a larger scale. There's not as much privacy around that kind of grief. There's a lot of speculation, rumors, a lot of just a lot of sharing on the social media. I really, sometimes I wish that those kids would come to counseling when they've lost a friend, because I think that grief can get a little distorted based on the kind of sharing that goes on on social media about the friend who died. Then there's also, there's a lot that's been written about regarding celebrity death. And that is also, I think in some cases, it does have a really strong impact on a child. I know that my son had very, very serious reaction to the death of a musician when he was in high school, and he was a guitarist. And that was when he went to counseling because of the impact of that celebrity death on him. So again, there are things to read about it. You can always use a counselor so that there's another avenue for that teen to be able to talk. I've also done groups with teens who've lost someone in high school, where they're able to talk about the loss together and what it meant to each of them. And that kind of tamps down the potential for distortions around the loss.
That is very helpful, Cindy. Thank you. We had a message in the chat. So it says that, hold on, let me increase that for myself so that I can read it. Okay. So it says that my 16-year-old son took his life in November. He has 2 siblings. His older brother is angry and won't talk about him. His younger sister said she feels like he's coming back. She's been sleeping a lot. I have bought them both books to read and to help them with their grief. I'm struggling with my son being angry. I know that I need to respect his feelings, but I'm finding it almost disrespectful. Hold on, is that what it says? Disrespectful with how he changes the subject and won't even talk about his brother or mention his name.
Yeah. I know that I'd be asking a question about how long that's been going on. I would want to know if that angry teen has anybody that he's been able to talk with about his anger. I would pay very close attention, being the parent, trying to understand what kind of relationship this angry young person had with the sibling who died. And that is, to be able to talk about it, I would very delicately approach, with these wondering things like, I wonder what it's like to remember that you had a brother who bullied you and is no longer with us. Like I said, it doesn't always work. I don't want to give the impression that you can listen to this little lecture here tonight and figure that you're going to have this very rich grief culture in your family all of a sudden. It really is something that has to be built with time and trust and exploration. So the angry teen is going to have to be given time to disclose these things. And he's more likely to do it if he feels that his anger is going to be validated.
Cindy, can I ask a question?
Yeah, you can.
So one of your,
the one thing I want to hold on to is the fact that this person is perceiving it as kind of disrespectful. And I think that if you could suspend that concern about it being disrespectful, it's going to be possible to hear something as long in a situation where the teen is going to be able to feel that his anger is something that you can see and hear without the judgment. So feeling that it's disrespectful is going to be some kind of judgment that it's going to be much harder for him to open up, much less likely for him to open up if he's going to feel that he's being judged as disrespectful for the feelings that he holds. Okay, Debbie, what?
so one of your points on one of the latter slides is ask for feedback and be prepared to receive it. Can you respond to this parent by giving an example of how this parent might ask his angry child for feedback
Mhm.
and how he might prepare himself to receive his angry son's feedback. What might that, I mean, because it sometimes when this stuff's really tough, actually using the words that somebody else might have could potentially help him. I'm not saying it necessarily would, but perhaps you could fashion a statement or question.
Well, when I say be prepared for feedback, so
You said ask for feedback. So
yes, yes.
Yeah.
So
how might he do that? I don't mean to put you on the spot. I'm just
no, I
trying
know. I mean,
to think my way through this.
mhm. So what has come up? Has the child had an outburst? The teen, try not to call him a child. Has the teen had an outburst? Has the kid hung back when there's some general conversation in the family about the sibling who died? So I think that in this, you're going to offer some affirmation for the teen as they're presenting right there. Like, you seem so bummed out. You seem so mad right now. And I really want to understand it. It's okay. It's okay that you're mad. I want to be able to, touch into this with you. I want to be able to talk with you about it. And then he gets mad and he pushes you away and you try again. I think that that after some time with genuine, sincere efforts to try to make an inroad, there might be a way in. And the feedback is really important, because if they say, stop bugging me, I don't want to talk about it, it's important to say, you don't want to talk about it right now, I understand. It doesn't mean that it'll never be talked about again. It's, you don't want to talk about it right now, I understand. I worked with this really wonderful family where there was a boy who had a real difficult relationship with his dad, who died, took his life. And he was struggling about how to do this grief, because part of him was really feeling some relief. It looked like interactions in the family were going to be easier, but he was spending an awful lot of time in his room. His mom said that he was difficult to access. So she was trying to think of ways to bring them all together. And she arranged for a rental of a little cabin on a lake. She had a lot of hope for that effort. But even there, he was staying in his room, playing video games and not engaging in very much dialogue. And although she'd say, please, come out to the beach with us, it was something that he responded to it at some point. So the setting was there, the invitation was there, the welcome was there, and understanding, making that space in her mind for that child's need to retreat was there. And I have to say that very gradually, the communication in that family became more possible. So maybe I really need to emphasize the fact that patience and time is part of this. I do think that counselors can help with consultation and being another pair of eyes that are set on the grieving kid. that's the best way that I can answer that. When I say be prepared for feedback and accept the feedback, sometimes that's verbal, it's nonverbal, but don't be too offended by it. It's a protection. And if we get too concerned about what's respectful and what's not, I think that just puts up a barrier to a really productive connection.
Oh, thank you, Cindy. Okay, I see another question that came through, asking how important to the grief process is making friends, especially for a teen who underwent a move and did not have any friends in the place where they relocated. So I think maybe going back to sort of what you had said about the socialization piece for adolescents, if that's.
Well, I for any age, really, I think that the socialization is a big piece. And it does provide relief for grief, because usually kids are bringing their minds to something entirely different and not their loss when they are with their friends, if it's a family member who has died. Yes, I would provide every opportunity for that child to socialize. And if they're not having a lot of respect, or not having a lot of success on their own in the new school, there are activities and extracurricular things that might wind up in some kind of connection. I always say we don't need to have a lot of friends, and I think that even goes for kids. Having one or two friends, familiar faces, somebody to sit with at lunch, is a very successful start for somebody who tends to not be social. I know of a teen who did retreat and neglected any socializations after a very complicated loss with his father, and is just now, at the age of 18, realizing that this in itself was a loss to him. And he wants to know, what do I do about this now? How do I now get friends? So that's what he's recognized he wants to work on. And it's all connected with that loss. And he himself, as an older teen, is able to make that connection. Because life continues to unfold. We pay attention to it after losses. Is there anything else that I can address?
Oh, we just got another question. So that was good timing. A couple, actually. So this one says, how can we talk to a child who feels some responsibility for his dad taking his life? He knew his dad was sad and feels that he should have told his mom. And this is coming from a concerned grandparent.
Okay, so can you read that once again? There's some parts there that can you read that again, Emily?
Sure, yeah. So how can we talk to a child who feels responsible for his dad taking his life? He knew that his dad was sad and he feels like he should have told his mom. And this is from his grandmother. So this is who's posing the question.
Okay. So I guess that if you were sitting in the office with me, I'd say, how do you know that he feels responsible for his dad's death? And I mean, it sounds like a very reasonable assumption that you're making. If you know that he has said, I didn't tell mom that dad was sad. But of course, not telling mom that dad is sad is not the reason that his father died. And that's the first thing that he needs to understand. And it's also really important for him to understand that when he saw that his father was sad, he did not know that that meant that his father was going to die. I'm talking with a wonderful young teenager right now who noticed that her father was changing, who was able to say, I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what it meant. And I think this is the very first thing that has to be acknowledged. It's not very often that we expect somebody that we love, somebody that we see undergoing change, that we expect them to die. And I think that's something that you can talk about this young person about. And who knows where it will go from there. If he's comfortable and feels that you are empathic, as you have, your first conversations about this may open up more. I think you said that he doesn't like to be home anymore in the place where the death took place.
Oh, so that's a different question.
That's a different one?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So that one reads, there it is. Yes. How do you work with a 21-year-old who doesn't want to be in the house anymore where his brother took his life?
Okay, so the 21-year-old is definitely has his sovereign grief experience, and I think that the relationship with parents monitoring the privacy of grief with a 21-year-old has to be a little bit different. You can always open yourself to saying, I would love to talk with you. I would love to talk with you about what's happened with us. You can ask, what can I do to make home more comfortable for you? We want you to be here. You can make generous offerings like, can we get together outside of the house? What if we get together in the backyard? What if we get together at a restaurant? I think to send the message that their visits, their presence are precious and you want to be with them. And you're showing openness about how that can happen. I don't know if this 21-year-old is living in the house where he doesn't want to be anymore, but then there's a lot to do with that. Maybe the 21-year-old is really needing to and is ready to be living more on their own. There's a lot of conversation to be had around that. I hope that that the 21-year-old would be interested in talking about it to some extent. I think that the empathy for the fact that this is a young adult with a sovereign grief experience to be respected is the best attitude to begin a conversation with. You want to let them know that you want to welcome them and you want to make any changes that will make them more comfortable.
I will add to that also that we do have a young adult group. So a 21-year-old would also be very welcome to our young adult group. But there's, as it might be helpful just to touch base with other young adults. And I'm saying that because we just got another question as well that says, I have a 21-year-old who lost their sister and she's also having a hard time. She lives by herself and is not sharing her feelings. What can I do?
Yeah, I think that, well, yes, I'd say the young adult group would be a great recommendation because you see how other people are coping, how other people's lives have been changed by this. Sometimes to just begin speaking about it can be so healing. In the context of a group, you've got lots of eyes and ears on you who are taking in what you have to say. They're relating and identifying to what your experience is, and there's something about that just makes you feel a little less lost because there are people around you who can relate to your experience. And when you don't have that and you're isolated in your loss, it's just very, very painful.
I appreciate the comment you made, Debbie, in there. Sometimes young adults will talk to other young adults when they don't want to talk to their parents. I think Cindy, you kind of touched on that with our teens also, right? That they might find a lot of comfort in being with their peers and seem to really be maybe opening up to someone in particular. It just isn't mom or dad.
Yeah, I think that the socialization part of the different developmental groups really should be stressed, and also it's diagnostic. When somebody is completely withdrawn, it says that something is going on that is asking for help.
Let's see. All right. Not seeing any other questions. Give it a second in case anything else comes through. I think it just because I just was scrolling through the chat too. The one thing I will say is that it sounds like a lot of the questions you're asking about, especially about your adolescents, are things that we see a lot kind of across the board. And so in loss, we do a lot of validating and normalizing, feelings of guilt and of just kind of, we have a lot of people sort of across the spectrum who tend to put their grief aside and trying to support someone else, whether that's trying to support a grieving parent or, a parent even maybe. And I'm just thinking about these examples that we've had before too, where because a parent feels so awful and they're not seeing their child kind of react in the same way, they're worried that maybe they're not feeling a certain way. So it's all very, very confusing, but this is helpful to think about it in a developmental way too.
Well, the development really helps you to kind of organize. I mean, parents usually feel that they know where their kids are at. But to talk about this and using development as kind of a framework for expectations that we're going to have about the way our kids are coping, and the way to talk about things, I think that it can be helpful. But my main message really is kind of this open space mind that accepts the presentation of your child's grief, wherever that is. And that's where you're going to make very tentative, respectful, delicate efforts to enter that space with them.
Absolutely. I am just putting our email really quickly here in the chat. So if anyone does have follow-up questions, or you're looking to maybe have a parent consultation with Cindy, to kind of go over some of the things that are going on in your family, please feel free to reach out to us. We can certainly help to facilitate that connection with folks.
I didn't really talk about trauma in this presentation because it's really a separate presentation. And I think unequivocally, when your child has a trauma that is associated with the loss, especially having been exposed to the death scene in some way, that yes, getting professional counseling and possibly psychiatric evaluation for some buffering medication is something really important to consider. I hope that you'll call loss if you feel that you've got a young person with trauma associated with a suicide loss.
And then Cindy, we did just get a question. So they say that they have a preschooler that is very interested in the how. They have used the word suicide, told them that Papa stopped his heart. They continue to ask how, and then said that in our case, it was a belt, but we are concerned that it will be tough because that's an everyday item, whereas the gun is not. Would that be too much detail?
So what happened was this person was asphyxiated by a belt, and you can teach them the new word asphyxiation. and that might make them feel important. But you can say, he did something with a belt that made it so that he couldn't breathe anymore. And that's about as graphic as you need to be. And you can also always tell kids, you know, you're not really old enough to understand all of the details, and I promise that I will tell you more when you're older. And that is true. So you always want to start where the child is in their capacity to understand and handle it. And then the truth builds from there according to their capacity for understanding. Yeah, sometimes you can just say they made their body stop working and that's enough. But there definitely are children who are more persistent about how and why.
Yeah. And and it sounds like they've already kind of been doing like what you said, like introducing new information when they're ready for that. And then, trying to find a way to, because I agree, there's a lot of, we talk a lot about fear in our program. We certainly never want to make anything scarier for someone, but it sounds like they have been addressing that really well.
Yeah, and it's also possible to say when there's a lot of whys, you can always say, I don't know. It's hard to understand. It's hard for all of us to understand. Some people don't like to use the word suicide for children, and I really think that's up to you. I don't think it's necessary to use the word with young ones. You can still convey what happened in very simple terms.
And I like that what you just said too, Cindy, that, I don't know is a valid answer for kids. And sometimes it's a valid answer for us too. Because sometimes we don't know either. So true. Lots of thank you, Cindy. So I can tell that a lot of people just appreciated what you had to say and what you shared with us this evening. So let's see. So if there is anything else, we'll take it. If anybody wants to unmute and ask a question, you're also welcome to do that. If you kind of scroll up in the chat, you'll see that I put a link to our YouTube channel. So as soon as I'm able to kind of get the files all converted, I will get those up on our YouTube channel. So they should be up this week. And several of our past presentations are also there. So it's a good place to look if you're looking for one of our past presentations. And again, loss@catholiccharities.net. It's pretty easy to remember. That's how you can contact us, and we can get back to you if you've got any requests about anything. So, all right. Okay. I'm not seeing anything else, Cindy, so I think we're in good shape.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you everyone so much. We are just so grateful that you could be here with us. And we hope that you will join us for our April presentation. We'll be talking about spirituality and grief, another kind of important topic. And I agree with Maria. Yes, Maria just said that, Cindy, your tone is very reassuring. I agree. It's always been that for me also. So I totally agree with that. But okay, so thank you all so much. And thank you to Cindy for the presentation. So we'll go ahead and end, and please feel free to contact us anytime for follow-up or questions.
Okay.
All right.